So my name's Jason Harmon. I'm CTO at Stoplight, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what that is. Relevant fact, in the last circa 6 weeks, we were acquired by SmartBear. There's not a lot about that in here because it's all pretty fresh, and we're still figuring out how sort of Swagger Hub and Stoplight are going to kind of come together. So you can ask questions. I probably don't have many answers, if some of you are wondering. So why should you listen to the Tattooed Freak? I guess I've done API stuff for a long time, right? Ranging from a variety of smaller startups on up to sort of big public companies like PayPal and Expedia Group. But I think for today, the bigger relevance is the API Intersection podcast that I host, where we talk to sort of program leaders, product managers, engineering folks, anyone who sort of has hands on APIs, to figure out what are the things that tend to be true regardless of scale, which is my personal obsession and fascination. So Stoplight, this is my only shill slide, I promise, just so you understand what we do and why what we learn from our customers is super helpful in this context. We're essentially an API design platform. You can think of it like Figma for your APIs, where folks can collaborate, get together, design what the APIs are going to be, from an API-first sort of product thinking perspective. So if we're going to talk about APIs as products, product folks tend to be sort of the brokers between your product development and your business. And so I think it's most important that we talk about what is the business value of your API. So if you came here for like the super geeky code demo stuff, it's not going to be that, certainly. I think what's great in the last few years, for me personally, for the last 15 years, I feel like every job I go to, I spend an inordinate amount of time trying to explain to business folks why APIs are important. It's exhausting, right? I think we're in a place now that this is, one, everybody's doing it, so this is probably an old man's perspective, but Marshall Van Alstyne, who, if you've never read Platform Revolution, great book that's excellent at understanding kind of this marketplacey version of platform. But they did a really intense academic study and looked at what is the competitive advantage of APIs. Actually, they looked at a lot of things, but this is the bit that I think is super important. On a 4-year period, those companies that had sort of APIs as a product first thing, API first, if you will, 12.7% more growth. Over that longer period, essentially, how long could you have had APIs? These companies are 40% bigger than their competitors. So if your business folks don't understand why this is important, just share this study and get out of the way. And it's published in Forbes, right? So that means it's good, right? So I think it's important, we say platform a lot, but to me, there's at least 2 different versions of what that means. And folks get really hung up trying to resolve this. And I think if we just looked at it from these 2 perspectives, it's a lot easier to get aligned. The first is what I call like the MIT school of thought. And this is that we're looking to build sort of this modular distributed architecture, right? Microservices, that sort of thing. And it's really about breaking down capabilities across your platform into single points of responsibility, decoupling things, that stuff. I'm sure many of you here are doing these sorts of things. It's important, it's relevant. It can make a big difference in how you scale your business. But I think a lot of business leaders, especially in the last circa 5 years, I feel like something must have gotten published in Harvard Business Review, because all of a sudden the business leaders woke up and went, we do API, let's do it, right? And that is really more about building a marketplace. And so you're really studying things more like macroeconomics and like, how do you balance supply and demand in a marketplace? These things are not mutually exclusive, for sure, but it's important to recognize who are you talking to in what context and what version of platform should you be talking about. And almost more importantly, in these 2 worlds, there are often competing priorities, and if you don't separate and understand that these are the 2 sets of priorities, you will never be aligned. So this all gives us context to start thinking about how do we explain to the business, how do we explain to product development, how we get aligned and go, become a platform, transform, or whatever it is. So, okay, you get it. It's important. You all took time to come sit here. I'm probably preaching to the choir. But how do we do this API product thing? And I'm going to have a very boring perspective in some ways, and what I've learned from our customers, from podcast guests, is it's just another product. And sometimes I think folks overthink this a little bit too much and try to, it's very intimidating because it's technical and we have to do something technical. Not necessarily, so let's dig into that. And so we got a little bit of an agenda to go through on this side of things. And the first is recognizing relationships, right? What relationships have we formed with our APIs? When someone goes to spend their engineering effort, put sprints against integrating with your API, you are building a business relationship for sure. And it's often very intense one because we have, we're affecting each other's uptime and reliability and scalability. These are important relationships. So know what relationship you're getting into. We'll dig into how to do that. The second, and obviously kind of what I'm leading up to here, is you better make sure you have your business bought in, or you're going to have one of those dead API projects by the side of the road. There's a lot of them. And the final is, it's just another product, except when it's time to sign off. And I think the biggest thing I see is product folks that say, engineering, is it good? It's good, boss. And then we ship it, and it's broken, and it's a terrible experience. If you're, who in the room here is actually managing an API product? Okay. How many of you are doing automated sign-off? Yeah, so we're going to talk about that. By the way, no one raised their hand. So recognizing relationships, let's dig into that. And there's a lot of words here. You don't have to read all this stuff. I'll walk you through it. I just like to have the reference for afterwards. I think maybe more than anything in here is you've got to have a customer-centric mindset. And I know everyone likes to say that. Everyone says, oh, we do our KYC surveys and this sort of thing. But if you have a greenfield, or more likely a brownfield of API integration space going on, you really need to dig in to understand who wants to integrate with this thing and what is it that they're trying to do. How do they see your business? What language do they use to describe what they're trying to accomplish? These are things that require discussion. They require lots of context. So if you're in a place where you already have APIs, but you're working on new stuff, how many of you already have APIs in place today? Okay, so a pretty good majority. How many of you have APIs in place that you think are great and that your next set of APIs are going to look just like it? A lot less, right? So this is typical. We go build something, we put it out there, it's been out there, it may or may not be making money, but we have a brand new vision of what the new API platform is going to be. And that's great. But don't forget to go talk to the folks who are already integrating today to understand what was it they were trying to do that's not working, that's taken you to this place that we need the new thing. Because there's a lot to be learned. They may say, I'm having to pull this thing all day long and I'm pushing up against your throttling limits and I wish you would just send me a webhook. I don't need a synchronous API anymore, right? That's a personal experience I've had. But one way to break this down further is, are these really folks who want to partner with your platform? They have their own platform and they want to share functionality with a shared set of users? Is this your customer who says, I need to automate my own data within your platform? Those are very different things, and actually I think ties in well with the identity discussion. This may fundamentally change what you're going to build from an identity and auth standpoint. If it's your own customer, here's your key, go get your stuff, no big deal. That's an easy project. If it's a vast array of platforms that want to integrate with us and we're going to give our users information to them, that's a very different ballgame, a lot more expensive, a lot harder. So know which of those realms you're heading into up front, and perhaps maybe don't do all of it at once. Pick one path. And I would certainly suggest the integrate with your own customers' data first is a heck of a lot easier to get the ball rolling if you haven't yet. Within those, you can certainly dig into, as part of that context, what kind of data are you trying to get? A lot of folks say APIs are just data, right? And you see all these products out there that say, just put this layer in front of your database and give the users your database over HTTP. Quite often, you could do that. But if we summed up the amount of lines of code written by your API consumers, that's probably an expensive way for everyone to do it. That's a lot of lines of code. Quite often, they're looking for some form of aggregation, some sort of logic that's added on top of the data. So I argue that APIs aren't just data if done well, right? These are the kinds of questions you can dig into as a product manager when you're looking at building an API. So that is all to set up that you understand the context of the business relationship. You know what kind of relationship that you want to form with what cohort of users, to then take back to ask the question, if we do this well, how will we measure its success? Someone smart told me once, you measure what you treasure. If you want your business to treasure the value of your APIs, you darn well better be able to prove their value with metrics and show that it's working. So that, again, you're not another dead API by the side of the road. And this is also to say that, if you look and say, we're going to be a platform now, we're going to build all the great APIs for all the different audiences, it turns rapidly into you never ship anything. You spend 2-3 years developing the perfect platform, and then eventually the bean counters chase you down when the economy crashes, and your platform's dead, and you're back to the old business. Get something shipped, right? Pick a use case. Pick something that has commercial viability. Pick perhaps something that's already on the roadmap that you can transform into an API. Get something shipped, prove its performance, show the measures, right? This is how success happens. Ocean boiling companies that sit around and waffle back and forth over what would perfection look like, write tomes of standards for years on end, they fail. Like, without fail, they fail. Don't boil the ocean with APIs. Pick something and ship it. And accept that it's not perfect, and that you're probably setting yourself up for a V2 at some point. But prove the value, right? All of this sets us up for, how do I make the pitch? How do I get this, bought in? How do I get, and I use executive as a broad brush here. Certainly at larger companies, that's probably going to be the case. But who knows? I'm just saying, get your business bought in, right? I'm going to say it again. The API is no different than any other product, really. The hard part is getting traditional business management, your sort of Harvard School of Thought, MBA types, to really feel bought in, that this is important. All that context we built before, all that learning that we built up is to build that great pitch. Before you have that, whether it be a board meeting or some alignment meeting or whatever, these are the things to start thinking about. What is today's business model? And how does this API fit into it? Because all too often, the API track, the platform business, is going to fundamentally change how you do business. And you may need to get way ahead with the exec types to say, if we do this, today's numbers aren't going to be better. But if we look at it through this new lens, it will be way better. But you have to understand how to do that. Things like network effects, right? If we integrate with this other platform, we introduce ourselves to a whole new realm of users who come in the door integrated. And when they're integrated, we retain them. Things like this, right? Value of the API, again, we're going to come back to that. And I said before, know how to measure what you treasure. And what you treasure is not lots of API calls. Most business leaders, when you say, I think we can get 1 billion API calls, they just hear a huge cloud bill and they're signed off. They're going back to the back of the deck going, where's the budget for this thing? I'm terrified. And I think folks will say, adoption and retention and these things, it is important, and I think it's a baseline of measurement. But if you can go a step further and actually attach, when this API stuff happens, this fundamental thing we do as a business will change. If you can tap into existing metrics and just have a subset of that's from APIs, that's always great, because you're tapping into something that's already understood, and you're truly showing the business value of the API. The rare instances where technical operation measures, things like API calls, work, is if you have something that one API call equals $1, right? And it's rare. It's really, really rare. So I generally would tell folks, don't look at that stuff. Your ops team and all that, it matters. But for the business discussion as a product manager, not your problem. And then the last bit, and this is a tie back to earlier, is we can talk about, an API program as a big concept, that this may change how we sort of build our architecture and that sort of thing, and it's important, and you want the engineering folks bought in too. But more importantly is, if you may be setting up the constructs of a marketplace, this is a heck of a lot easier to sell the business folks on, and it's something that quite often they're hearing about from this Harvard side of the world, right? And what's weird is, if you start looking through that lens, again, I'm going to go read Platform Revolution if you've never read it. It's a little long in the tooth at this point, but I think it's all still very valid. When you start looking at things through that lens, you realize lots of things can be thought of as a marketplace. If you start thinking about who's coming here to consume something, who's coming here to supply something, can we match those audiences? Many things can become a marketplace. Even if your first look at it is much more simple and functional, you can paint a bigger picture of how you can transform the business into a marketplace and get out of this sort of 80s MBA pipeline business way of thinking, which is failing, right? That is not what's winning in the market now. And to kind of tie all this up a little bit and make my third push, if you don't have business perspective around your API project, it's going to die. It's going to die a horrible death. It's going to be sad. You're going to have engineers who cry. Don't be that guy, right? Put a great business perspective around it. Paint a bigger vision for where all this could lead. Make sure you understand the context of how you might change your business, because you're going to need a couple of years for this to really take hold if you're just getting the ball rolling. If you say, we just launched the API, they go, great. Let's check in next quarter and see what the numbers are like. And you didn't have that 2 to 3 year vision around it, you got about 2 quarters before it's dead. So this is all to say that even more sort of fundamentally, if you don't think of your APIs as products, then they just become a commodity. It's a technical artifact. It's on the checklist of implementation details. And what that results in for the developers who are trying to integrate with your platform is an engineered experience. We've all been to some of these apps that you go to try to use, whether it be mobile or web, whatever, and you pull it up and you go, oh, they don't have designers, do they? Right? It's like this bland HTML form with nothing's easy to use. For those non-developers in the room, that's what it feels like when we go to one of these engineered APIs that didn't really have any sort of design thought put into it, any product thought put into the context. Acronyms that mean nothing, or unintelligible concepts that mean nothing to the customer, right? And that's to say that more than anything, be customer-centric in your APIs. Don't let the team that builds it define what it will be. Because when you're building an API, I should have mentioned earlier, most of my career I spent building backends, building the APIs myself. It is impossible to put yourself in the mindset of consuming this thing when you're building it, because you're surrounded by systems. And so you're naturally system-centric thinking. This is where I think the future of APIs is all about product management and being able to be that broker of understanding, here's what the business needs, here's what the consumers need, here's what the partner network needs, it's a lot, to then translate that back into, this is what the API design should be. And in fact, I think the future is that engineers building the API should not be the ones designing it. Perhaps they might do here's the data available, but I think there's ways to make that easy enough for even non-technical product managers to do with the right sort of governance guardrails. All right, on to something a little bit geekier, but we won't spend too much time on it. And this is back to the earlier question that no one raised their hand to. How many of you are automating your acceptance criteria? So there's lots of ways to do this, but I would certainly argue vehemently that in testing your APIs, and I'm not talking about unit tests and integration tests, there's many layers to that. I'm talking about, I'm in the middle of a sprint and devs say it's done. I want green lights. That's all I want. Show me the green lights on the test acceptance testing, so that I, as a product manager, can say, yep, I sign off on this. And preferably, I don't even say it. They say, hey, all the lights are green, we're good, right? Yeah, we're good, bye. And I'm not sitting around trying to make these calls and trying to read way early documentation that's not very good yet, right? All of this sets you up, though, that after you've launched this API, what often happens is we launch the API, and I'll ask the question, how many of you have launched an API and everything went perfect and there were no quality problems on launch? Okay, got the rock stars in the front row. So these half a dozen people, come meet them, find out what they're doing. But I would certainly say that if you've automated your acceptance criteria, you've set yourself up so that when you do launch, and problems do tend to happen, they only happen once because you can add that to the suite, right? And then you never launch that, you never push out that bug again. So it really raises the bar on quality. And the thing to embrace, if you're new to APIs, you're thinking about, let's go do this as a product, this should be the most highly automated testable surface that you have. You are literally building a programmatic interface. Take advantage, right? This is not a point-and-click interface where you're going to have some poor bastard with a spreadsheet clicking his way through stuff. There's no need for that. Automate it all. Everything you possibly can. And so this takes us to a place that we have something that is inherently stronger than every web-based or mobile-based product. This should be the strongest product, the most reliable product in your catalog, because it's completely automatable. But you'll notice I use the phrase scenarios here, and I think that's important too. Folks get caught up in the idea that I have one API, it does one thing, I test this one thing, and it's good. But in the real world, there is flow, right? You need multiple API calls to complete the job as a consumer. So my favorite example of this from my PayPal days is folks go, oh, well, it's a payment API, just test the payment. Well, that's not one thing. I need a credit card authorization that I then pass off to a third party, and it comes back. And then I have to take that authorization and all this other context I built. I have to pull in risk and compliance data. I have to do all these things that lead up to this moment of complete the transaction. That is a huge flow that if you test independently, I promise when you launch it, it's all broken. So test in scenarios that represent the customer's real use case, right? What's the job they're trying to do, and build that scenario as the test. That lets you sign off with total confidence that you've completed the job for those customers. And potentially even to go beef up those scenarios by looking at, the logs of activity. What are they actually doing? Oh, I was wrong. I missed something. Let's add that to the scenario. Single use case testing fails in the real world, even if it passes. All right, bonus tip, because I've done this talk before, and I got the friendly jab at the end. How on earth could you talk about API as a product without talking about documentation? And I was embarrassed. So here we go. We get more content. So we said before, this is a headless application. There is no point and click. It's a programmatic interface, and the business folks start, ooh, The documentation is your user experience step one. It's not to say it's all. So if in your company, your developer portal is the developer experience, and then you go build the API over here, you're doing it wrong, just to be clear. But it's the only way that people can find out how to use the thing. And it's the first thing they see. So you really should be putting a lot of attention to detail on this. This is what sells the adoption of your API. The API itself being a great experience, being understandable, and not having to go to the documentation to do everything, that's really important too. But if you start off with, hey, engineer that built the API, send me a PDF, one-pager of how to use this thing, you're not putting your best foot forward. And from a business standpoint, this is a cheap investment, right? If you don't have, actually, this is a good question. How many of you have tech writers that actually contribute to your APIs? Jeez. There's no conviction on anyone. It just still makes me sad that that's true. And I know it's true. That's why I asked. There are great technical writers out there who know how to document APIs, know how to sell that experience. Go find them and hire them. There's lots of them available on contract. They love freelance work. Don't let your engineers write the documentation without those people involved. It's going to be terrible. It's going to be an engineered experience because they're thinking in system-centric ways. They can't help it. So give them that help. Now, if you can't afford that and you're the product manager, do it yourself. Go actually use the thing and make sure that you write down what you had to do to make it work. Right? Don't make people go to support and go through 16 different queues to get to the engineering team 3 months later for the answer. Do it yourself, right? Fill in the blanks. So if you're looking for business justification to go hire that tech writer or to put more time into, put more sprints onto the project, this is about teaching your customers, prospects, employees, partners about what your product is, right? This is not a technical artifact. You wouldn't launch any other product without explaining why it's valuable. You should be here too. Another interesting bit, I think a lot of folks will do the let's go launch an external API, and then we have this crappy wasteland of microservices internally. I also think you're doing it wrong if that's your case. Unified capabilities that serve customers, partners, and other capability teams, that's the way, right? That's the way of the future. Just having a portal that folks can go to see the catalog of capabilities, here's all the API things we can do, can actually help reshape your organization, can help reshape the networks around you in explaining, here's what our capabilities are, here's how they fit together, here are the boundaries, but also to set up, this is what we built this API to do. So one of the classic, build it and they will come mistakes is, we built the universal API that's super flexible and can do anything, so we don't need to document a whole lot. And what happens is serendipity. Developers are creative. We come up with weird ways to use things that no one intended. And suddenly you have a massive log of bugs of things you never intended this to be used for. So frame strongly up front, this is what this is for, right? Don't start with the technical, start with this is what this is meant to be used for. And hopefully corral the right folks in and not the folks who are being overly creative and causing problems for everyone. This also helps kind of get folks to the right support queue. And how many of you have sort of dedicated API support? That's actually pretty good, 15. I expected 2. How easy is it for those consumers to get to that API support? How many of you feel like it's really easy and good? Okay, so half a dozen, that's pretty good. Because my experience is usually consumers have to go dig to find how to get support. They get dumped into a generic queue and they get passed off and passed off and passed off and passed off. And then the team that built it is the support team who are not equipped for it. And they have a huge backlog of other things to do, and it takes months to get an answer, and by then they've moved on and used your competitor. So keep in mind that you've got this surface that's the front door for the API. Put the here's how to get to support. And if the truth is the support is the team that built the API, fine. Dump them straight to it. Get it in their queue faster, right? And technical marketing efforts. I mean, I think if you're building API as product, this is built in. But for a lot of places, adding this sort of developer-centric component to what you do, this is the place to talk about it. This is the place to explain it. And by the way, don't sell anything there. Right? Don't sell anyone anything. The developers, we just are inundated with people trying to sell us things. Teach. Right? Teach, don't sell. I'll show you how to use the thing. I'll show you what it's for. I'll get out of your way. And your business will decide whether or not it's valuable. So these are all the things that kind of unfurl from documentation. It's not just about what's the ABC to how to use this. This is the front door for your product. So I mentioned before the kind of microservices, internal API stuff. Actually, in my opinion, that's the frontier. That's the fun stuff. That's 98% of APIs in the world. The stuff that's publicly available, it's a tiny fraction. And one of the key things I mentioned before, if you've got a portal that explains here's all the APIs in the company, you just avoided a bunch of duplicated projects, right? People that multiple teams will see the same market signals and go build almost the same thing, but not quite. And now you have a huge unification merging project in your future. The moment you decide that you're going to go design an API for something, put it in the portal and put it as proposed. Now everyone knows you've peed on that tree, you've marked your territory. We're going to go build this thing. And if you want to build it too, come join us, right? Let's join forces. You can build shared leverage, avoid that duplicated effort. And again, increase the organizational awareness. And being a somewhat technical guy, my experience is usually that business leaders have very little idea what the actual reality is of what customers are doing. They're just looking at the spreadsheet of numbers. Having this out there within your company helps them better understand what's possible and stop signing those deals with a 90-day close for integration that's completely impossible, right? Externally, obviously, day one, if you know nothing, adoption is the game. Get people using the API. You didn't build it so it could sit there idle, right? Again, the documentation's what will lead them there. And I said before, you're forming a relationship. Well, if there's a really great set of resources on how to use this thing, how to deal with problems when they occur, how to figure out what errors mean, you've just made a better relationship that has a lower operational cost. It's just a win, right? And again, documentation's cheap, why not? And at the end of the day, great portals, great documentation, I would argue is probably the biggest reason why folks get a great reputation in the developer community. And if you don't know it yet, if you're just getting into this game, word of mouth is how that happens. You're not going to get marketing attribution reports that prove why the developer stuff's working. It's about street cred, right? And developers really value when you don't waste their time because they have 2 weeks to ship anything in sprint format, right? So if I can go solve my own problems, I don't get dumped into a long support queue, and I can get the thing shipped, I'm going to turn to my neighbors and say, man, I just used this thing. It was great. I had problems, but the documentation helped me solve it. So document your stuff. Put some real effort into it. As a product manager, if you're just getting the ball rolling, put a big bucket for that one. Put real budget to it, and treat it as a first-class thing alongside the actual development. I actually, with my friend here, Dan Barahona, put together a course on this on APISec University. It's normally kind of a more security-oriented set of content, but we realized in digging into it that another aspect of API documentation is that your security posture will improve significantly. So we did a pretty significant course on this that's free for anyone to go do, where I go way deeper into this subject. Probably too deep, I'm sorry. So if you want to learn more stuff like this, just kind of these universal concepts that tend to work, you can go listen to the conversation that we've had with all these folks on the API Intersection podcast. It's available on all the different podcast platforms. And there's no Stoplight or SmartBear shilling on there. This is just community talk. It's a safe place. It's okay, developers. I'm not going to sell you anything. And with that, I'm done. And not too over time.